Anyone have anything exciting happen? Hopefully no fires. Austin, do you want to pull up the week in advance?
Right on it. It always takes that little extra second. Let's see. There we go.
All right. So hopefully everyone got the memo and didn't join yesterday, but we are back. Oh,
there we go. No, you're good.
Yeah, we are back to our Tuesday morning meetings for our all office meetings. So this will be moving forward. We had just kind of adapted our schedule a little bit for COVID and added some more meetings, but moving forward, Tuesdays, 10 a.m., once a week, jam-packed with lots of good quality information. So moving forward, just mark your calendars for Tuesday. Also, right after our meeting today, Chantel is going to be teaching a command compliance training with DocuSign and zip forms. And then tomorrow, Tanya is going to teach a command class, and we have our CE class on 1031 extensions and recession strategies, sponsored by Fidelity Title. And then Thursday, Mike is starting his contract class. So this is going to be for any new agents. Highly recommended taking this just to get an overview of the contracts, and Mike can share a little bit about that in a sec. And then we have our Social Equality Committee meeting led by Connie Vera on Thursday at 3 o'clock. So feel free to join that as well. And if you have questions about that, you can reach out to Connie directly. Mike, do you want to share a little bit about contracts class?
Absolutely. I've shifted gears a little bit from what I did in the spring and last fall, and I've shortened the classes and done it as a 4-part class. I'll be teaching a 4-part contracts class series over the next 60 days, starting with this Thursday, 10 a.m. via Zoom. It'll be an overview class of what's out there and what, the general overview and life of a transaction will be the first class, really geared towards that newer agent who's just coming in and trying to process what the whole picture looks like. Next Thursday, I'll have a second class, which will be placed on residential sales agents or sales agreement. So it's really focused on going line by line through the transaction on a sales agreement and what is important to talk to your client about, what is just an overview, and those things you need to know. That class is really geared to both a first timer and middle grouping, because there's always, every time I read it, be quite frank with you, I learned something. As the number of times I've read through it, I still learn something or say aha. So it's a good refresher course for agents to do. And then August we'll have a best practices and a risk management course or class. And those dates are to come. I will mail out the link for this Thursday's class. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me. We can chat a moment and make sure that I either talk to you at that moment in time, or we can refer to the class and spend a little time with that. But that's what I got coming up. So.
Thanks, Mike. And yeah, again, even if you're not brand new, but if you have not yet taken a contracts class from Mike, it's a great opportunity to learn everything, all the little ins and outs of the contracts from Mike's point of view. Also, this last week, Mike sent out an updated social media policy. So hopefully everyone saw that in their email. If not, go back and take a look. It's just a little bit more detailed than we've ever had before. And just talks a little bit about, as a representative of Keller Williams Portland Premier, to make sure to be mindful of your social media. So if you have any questions on that specific policy, reach out to Mike again on that. All right, so before we get into our guests for today, just want to remind everyone that we are still doing Free Lead Summer. So some people have taken advantage of this, but as a reminder, every throughout summer and get a $20 reimbursement. So, Tanya, do you want to share some success so far?
Yes, we had some really good ones. Diane did a listing ad on one of her listings and got 10 leads, so $1.80 a lead. And Bradley has done a buyer ad trying to attract buyers, and he got 17 leads for $1.76 a lead. And Mark has done an ad for brand awareness on a listing and got 7 leads for $2.86 a lead. So we've got some really great, there's some other ones, but those are our big ones. So keep them going. We're having a class tomorrow. We'll talk about what type of ads are working, and we'll create an ad before the end of the class.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, so if you haven't taken advantage of that, it's free money for advertising for this summer. So Tanya is having these classes every week to help you out. If you need one-on-one help, you can always reach out to her or refer back to the previous videos on the YouTube channel. But all you have to do is once you do your campaign on Facebook, just take a screenshot of it and send it to Heather, and she will reimburse you your $20. So you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and remember this, the Market Center is reimbursing you for these ads, and the goal is for you to use these ads to create brand awareness for yourself and your name and the products that you represent, whether it's a Keller Mortgage ad or whether it's a profile ad or whether it's a listing ad. This is the time to do that because especially with July and August coming up, a lot of realtors are going to be on cruise control, and that's when you get market share. That's when the buyers float around because the realtors are on vacation and didn't tell them about a new listing that came up. So these are the times to push forward on your activities to build your business. Right now is perfect month.
Yeah, and the consistency is important, right? Not just doing it one week, but doing it consistently with any kind of marketing that you're doing. So that's why we're reimbursing every week, so we can give people the opportunity to keep going and see, you know, hone in on maybe a specific neighborhood or certain area and really focus in on that. So, all right.
To get reimbursed, and it takes 5 seconds.
Say that again, Tanya.
And you're not getting reimbursed. So we have a few, we've got like a handful of people that are consistently doing this. We need everybody. If you're doing an ad, turn it in, please.
Great, thank you. All right, so without further ado, we have a special guest today. We have Shaun Jillions from OAR, and our lovely Beth was nice enough to arrange him being here. Beth, do you want to introduce him? I didn't tell you about this. I'm just springing it on you. I can.
Put an opportunity to pass up for me to introduce Shaun Jillions, partly because of all the things I do know that I'm not going to say that he'll remember later on that I didn't say. I've known Shaun a lot of years through OAR, Government Affairs, or PAC trustees. I like to say I knew him when he was the good Shaun. So those of you that know Shaun know that was a while ago. One of the brightest legal minds I know. And frankly, if we didn't have Shaun at OAR, we wouldn't be nearly as far along as we are. With a great deal of respect, and I'm grateful every day for his friendship. Please welcome Shaun Jillions.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Shaun, for being here. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. That was incredibly gracious. And Beth's known me since, as I see this close-up of myself, since this beard actually used to be dark. So it has been a while. Let me see if I can. Austin, you want to go ahead and just take over the controls? I was worried this might be a little slow. Perfect. So we'll go through quickly sort of the layout of the legislative session, what it looked like. This was certainly unprecedented given COVID. Just by a little way of background, I've had the opportunity to represent you all for 13 years now in Salem. Have been involved in Salem politics for about 20 years and general politics for about 25. So this was incredibly unique given our circumstances. Whenever you guys see sort of the bold text that's in a box or sort of stands out, those are newspaper clippings, just so you guys know it isn't my made up opinion. So I'll give you plenty of that too. But for this particular one, you see with public shutout, masked up legislature convenes in Salem. So they did come into a special session. No one was allowed to be there from the public side. If you wanted to testify or give your input, it was a very unique process where you had to sign up a day in advance, let the committee administrators know. You got to be on a phone call, even though they were meeting via the Zoom platform. So you had zero interaction with legislators via the phone. Really was quite awkward to get your opinion across. And quite frankly, we did a lot of texting and emails and things like that, which is a little more difficult when you're trying to make changes to significant policy. I think the other thing that was a big problem about this particular session is rather than the typical legislative session where both chambers, the House and the Senate, have individual committees and they actually interact with each other and they take testimony and they look at amendments. This special session had a single joint committee, and the single joint committee was run by the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, who you see there. They were the only ones who could allow amendments to be put forward. They were the only ones who could allow bills to be introduced, and they controlled the entire process. And quite frankly, the Speaker really controlled the entire process. Tina Kotek is our state's longest serving Speaker, and she has certainly gotten better and better at consolidating power to the point where I would argue, honestly, she's the most powerful person in Oregon politics at this point in time. So let's jump in, next slide, to sort of what they were looking for when they came in, and particularly given the George Floyd death in Minneapolis, police reforms really sort of rose to the top. Back in March, when our lockdown first began, the legislature actually convened a joint committee made up of members from both chambers, both parties, and they sort of looked at what they could do around COVID and what response would be needed from the state level. That fizzled out, and they didn't end up doing a special session. So they started meeting in March. They met for 2 weeks straight. The committee hearings usually last about 4 or 5 hours, and they came up with a series of recommendations. And ultimately, the governor didn't call them in. And so with the need for police reforms sort of jumping to the top, I actually rearranged what the priorities were as they came in, and you saw 6 different bills introduced on police reforms. We're not really going to go into those, but just to sort of give a sense of that was the impetus really for the governor calling them in, because without the legislature in session, the governor could do a lot of things via executive order, which is exactly what we saw, and she didn't necessarily see the need to have the legislature come in. Let's go ahead and jump, Austin. So first thing that we were able to do, rocketing into the 20th century, Oregon now allows remote notarization. I think the number now is up to 48 out of 50 states allow it. So yay us, we were number 48. As soon as this crisis started, we were pushing hard on the Secretary of State to allow this. I will say the Secretary of State's office has been incredibly helpful in the process, but they came back and said, no, under current Oregon revised statutes, we do not have the authority to implement remote notary. We need the legislature to act. So this has been sort of one of the top of the list things that we've asked for if the legislature was going to come in, and we were successful in getting that granted. These little clips that are up there are actually from the Secretary of State's website. I'll give this presentation to Austin afterwards and can share it with you all if you want that link there. All the questions are sort of answered on the Secretary of State's website about how remote notary will work in Oregon. And they even have a list of approved vendors that they originally put forward. There's about 15 of them. It's not exclusive, but they do have about 15 folks that the Secretary of State has identified as meeting sort of the criteria for moving forward there. Obviously, a big deal in the COVID crisis to not make folks come in and sign in person. And I think that many states would argue that remote notary is just as strong in their identification procedures as in person. So that's what we have. I will make one note that the bill was passed and it's temporary in nature. So it only lasts until July of next year. We will make a push in the 2021 session to make sure that's permanent, because I think most of us recognize that remote notary is here to stay. I know that I just got a document literally this morning in DocuSign. So we're pretty comfortable in signing things electronically these days that have significant impacts. And if you guys have any questions at any time, please feel free to interrupt me. I hate sort of the talking at you nature of Zoom these days, but feel free to jump in. Let's jump ahead, Austin. Okay, so big ticket item. I hope that this has at least some questions or you all are aware of it. There is an eviction moratorium in Oregon. This started with an executive order from the governor. And I think it's important to note what was in the governor's executive order. From a legal perspective, there was some dispute about how broad it was, but I think most folks agreed that effectively all evictions, were precluded under the governor's executive order. So whether that was for cause, whether that was for non-payment of COVID, whether it was for any of the landlord-based reasons that we had, all evictions were effectively put on hold in the state under the governor's executive order. And she was set to extend that. It expired the end of June, and she would have just extended the version that she had. So it became increasingly important for us to engage at the legislative level. I mentioned it was sort of difficult to testify, but I did manage to get in on the call and sort of push on the speaker about some things that we wanted to see in the bill. And we'll sort of walk through that there. We also put out some written concerns to the entire legislature, and you sort of see my comments there. I think that's from an OPB article where we really wanted to see it a little more narrowly tailored, and actual proof of loss of income due to COVID, I think would have been an important step. We weren't able to get that there, but we were able to get some good concessions there. I think the first and most important concession that we got is this in September 30th. We got the governor's office to come in and testify on the record that they will not extend via another executive order. So for landlords, those of you who are landlords or who are dealing with your clients who are landlords, the moratorium ends on September 30th. That is the end of the line for this sort of grace period for tenants to not pay their rent. And we understand it's a significant period of time and a significant hardship for landlords, but we at least were able to finally get an end date. If you look at the picture there, that's our good friends at Portland Tenants United. They were asking for free rent for 2 years. They were pushing hard for, as you see, rent freezes there. And it really was sort of a big push in the legislative arena. The other thing that we had heard repeatedly from our members was that transactions were in jeopardy. We had a story that I told to the legislature, which was an 88-year-old woman in Southern Oregon purchases a property that she intends to occupy as her primary residence. There's a month-to-month tenant in there. She purchased it in January, gave the required 90-day notice and the relocation payment to get the tenant out. The governor's order comes down about 60 days into that 90-day period. In March, the tenant then refuses to leave because evictions are precluded. The tenant refuses to pay any additional rent, and this woman is unable to move into the home that she purchased and intended to occupy, and now has no home to live in, and that would have extended for an indefinite period of time. Under the new bill, 4213, you can actually give that landlord-based reason now and proceed with removing the tenant there if the required notice is given. So I think that was a big push to get in there. The speaker was incredibly reluctant to give us that exception. I don't know why it had to be such a big fight. We had supporters on both sides of the aisle pushing for it, but it didn't make it into many of the amendments to the bill until the last sort of round in the final hours, and we were able to do that. Also of note, it applies to commercial properties as well, the eviction moratorium. I think that was a push for Oregon small businesses and particularly restaurants who are seeing a significant decline in revenue, that they can't be evicted at this point in time. One thing to note too is, so September 30th is the end of this. October 1st, if you had the ability to issue a no-cause notice, so the tenancy was in the first year of its tenancy, you have 1 month to do that, and you can execute no-cause terminations of agreements October 1st. There's also a 6-month grace period for tenants to make up the back rent during this emergency period, which expires on September 30th. So September 30th comes and goes. The tenant is then required under state law to give notice that they're going to exercise the 6-month grace period. They then have the 6 months to make up that back rent that was due. Important to note, future rent, so the rent that was due October 1st is absolutely required to be paid. It is not subject to any moratorium or special treatment. So if they do not pay the rent on October 1st, they're in violation of the rental agreement or whatever your rent date is. So that's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel as we look at that. I'm going to pause on that one and see if you guys have any questions, because I know this is probably the bill that's caused, or the issue that's caused the most consternation. Okay, can't say we didn't offer. Let's jump to the next one. Oregon, first state in the union to put a moratorium on commercial evictions or foreclosures. This is I will say that we were torn on this bill. As a Government Affairs Key Committee, the Government Affairs Key Committee is comprised of realtors from throughout the state, and they go through the bills as we lay them out for them during the session and sort of look at the pros and cons and issues that are there. At the federal level, NAR and OAR through our delegation pushed really hard for a foreclosure moratorium because we wanted it to be uniform across the country and apply to all lenders. The problem that happens when Oregon delves into this space is they have very limited control over federally chartered banks. So the large banks, the Wells Fargos of the world, really typically are not subject to many of the Oregon provisions, but what we would consider the better actors in the market, your community banks who work with folks with their folks that they're lending to in a little more proactive manner. Those folks are always subject to the provisions of Oregon law. So similar sort of state of emergency. The date ends on September 30th. On the residential and commercial side, you cannot initiate a foreclosure proceeding until after that date is over. On the residential side, you as a borrower have to notify the bank that you are falling behind on your payments and you want forbearance. The payments automatically go to the end of your note without penalties or fees. So you just tack on, let's say you were utilizing 4 months, you tack on 4 months to the end of your mortgage. So the lender still does get paid, and probably a good way to go about it. On the commercial side, or if you own multifamily, you actually have to show a loss of income due to COVID. So there are those limitations there. What that documentation looks like was not spelled out in the bill. So I think that will be sort of a process that lenders work out with their borrowers of what they're looking for there. But that will be sort of one provision that's a little different. And the thing I was just looking at last night as I was reading through the bill too, it is retroactive to March 8th. So you can go back if you haven't made payments and apply and sort of give this notification that you're seeking forbearance retroactively to your March payment on your mortgages. All right. So what didn't we do? Those were sort of the big things from a real estate perspective that we figured were going to be involved. So remote notary, very high on the list. Some sort of end date on the eviction moratorium and a clear path for good faith purchasers who are going to occupy. And then it was debatable whether or not there was going to be any action taken on foreclosures. Ultimately, that did pass in the last day of the special session, which went for 3 days. There was a big push for liability protections for businesses. So effectively, while there was a lot of misinformation put out there by our good friends at the Trial Lawyers Association about what the bill, in particular, there was an amendment drafted to House Bill 4212. What this basically said is if a business is following all CDC and OSHA guidelines around sanitation, social distancing, mask requirements, and someone ultimately did end up contracting the coronavirus, that they couldn't be sued for that, provided they were actually following all best practices. Now, if they weren't following all best practices, if they were putting their employees or customers in jeopardy, they were certainly subject to potential litigation. But for those who were following all guidelines, there was this push to give liability protections. This is also incredibly important for school districts as they look at whether or not they're going to reopen in the fall. And the speaker was incredibly reticent to push forward with anything on this front. So we made a very strong push and got bipartisan support for an amendment. There are 38 Democrats in the House out of a total of 60. We managed to get 13 of them and all 22 Republicans to sign on in support of an amendment. So there was, those are the ones who actually were willing to sign a letter in support of an amendment to give businesses and local governments and school districts this immunity from, or not immunity, this liability protection from potential frivolous lawsuits. And in the Senate, you probably had, I think if the bill had come to the floor, 20 out of 30 members that supported it. There really was a strong push for about 24 hours. And ultimately, the speaker unilaterally said in committee hearing, we will not move this issue forward, period. Anyone who signed up to testify on it can drop off the call now. There were about 30 people signed up to testify, and they were all dropped off the call. So definitely something that has risen to the level of public awareness. And as you see, I mentioned, these are newspaper headlines. So that's Oregonian on top. They just put out an editorial on Sunday saying that the legislature absolutely needs to take this up and that businesses need greater support. I think this is an issue not only in your individual offices as you all follow all the social distancing guidelines, it's also an issue as you're taking the public into people's homes. And if you're following best practices and ultimately someone contracts corona, it shouldn't be liability that comes back on you, provided that you can demonstrate you followed all CDC and OSHA guidelines. That's the super conservative Willamette Week on the bottom, saying that there was bipartisan support and further sort of demonstrating that this is something that needs to be addressed. There are a series of work groups that were put forward, or that was sort of the proposal from the speaker. I will say from a lobbying perspective, whenever I want to kill something, I say, let's put it to a work group. And then you just sort of slowly suffocate it. So the speaker, I think, has zero intention of moving this forward and put it in a work group, but we're going to keep sort of that public pressure on her to move something forward in what will be the next special session. which is likely to occur either at the end of this month or the beginning of August. Okay, last slide. The absolute failure of the legislature and the biggest thing that they did not address is our current budget deficit. Not a big shock to you all, but particularly the response to coronavirus has caused a global recession and has caused significant declines in not only business revenue, but local government and state government revenue as well. And our current budget is a 2-year budget. The second year of the budget started on July 1st, and we are $2.7 billion in the hole for our current 1-year budget. So the state of Oregon, if they are going to balance their books, which they are constitutionally required to do, needs to cut $2.7 billion in expenses. To date, they have known this since May. To date, they have cut zero, repeat, zero. And the governor put forward a proposal for across the board 17% cuts, but has not enacted or moved forward with any of those cuts. She simply asked agencies to put that forward. So an incredible failure thus far from our state as we look at what that $2.7 billion hole looks like. You also see the headline there. We're looking at $10 billion in lost revenue over the next 5 years. So we will see incredible pressure in 2021 for additional revenue. I assure you that it is not the nature of Oregon's current system of government to make cuts. It is a push to increase revenue instead, and I think you'll see a series of increased tax proposals. From the real estate side, there was a coalition of Oregon's public employee unions. They have a think tank out in Silverton that they all fund. They put in a $2 billion package for new tax revenues. They included things like limits on itemized deductions, limits on the mortgage interest deduction, elimination of 1031 exchange deferral, reductions in property tax deferrals, and a whole slew of things that we care about in the real estate industry. At the same time, in the 2020 short session, the governor put forward a proposal to repeal our prohibition on real estate transfer taxes. So we will likely be looking at a proposal for real estate transfer taxes in 2021 as well. I think that the folks at NAR think I'm making things up when we talk about all the potential things that we face. It's literally the litany of the most serious issues from a tax perspective that the real estate industry faces, and they can't honestly believe that we face all of them at once in a single session, but that's really sort of what we're looking at as we approach 2021. So sorry that I don't have better news. I really do feel like in this COVID world, it'd be nice if I could give you guys some good news, and let's go back and yay, you got remote notary. That's about all I can do for you. But thanks for having me this morning, and happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
I do have one question, Shaun. This is Beth. The governor has said that the next special session will just be about the budget. Do you think that's true?
I think that the third special session will just be about the budget. I think there will be an additional special session that deals with some policy issues, including liability around the coronavirus. I think that one of the most significant police reforms, and it not necessarily relevant to the real estate industry, but I'll point out this one. So one of the most significant reforms was to any deadly use of force investigation, have the Attorney General handle that rather than a local district attorney in the community that the incident occurred in. The legislature put that forward. The legislature didn't bother to check in with the Attorney General before they put that proposal forward. And the legislature also didn't provide any funds to the Attorney General for taking that on. And so the Attorney General had some significant concerns with that. That also got put over to a work group. So I think you'll see those issues rise up in this next session. What the governor is really hoping for is that the feds will come through with a giant chunk of money for state and local governments. I don't necessarily see that happening. I think the U.S. Senate at this point in time has talked about additional stimulus checks for individuals, perhaps more PPP loans, and things of that nature. But I don't think you're going to see what the U.S. Senate would view as giant bailouts for state and local governments coming this way. So I think that we're holding on to false hope for a savior from the federal government, and that we ultimately will have to make some cuts in state government. And I read the other day the governor is still moving forward with 15% raises for some state employees in the face of a $2.7 billion deficit at the state level, which probably strategically, it's sort of like maxing out your credit card when you know that you're not going to have any income to pay the bill. And I did see Maria asked when we think the liability issue will come back up. I think hopefully the strong push will be end of this month or beginning of August. And we will make it retroactive back to when the emergency started if we're able to get something on that front.
Shaun, I have a question. With the stock market down, is there any renewed conversation around the PERS deficit and potential taxes for that?
I think that the government feels, or the legislature in particular, feels like they solved the PERS crisis by requiring state employees for the first time to actually contribute to their own retirement account. Inevitably, I offend someone in this conversation, and I just apologize in advance, but I don't necessarily see the hardship of contributing 0.75% of your salary to your own retirement as a significant hardship, and that's what the legislature did last time for current employees. We will certainly be facing a significant PERS deficit, as we have been. The number fluctuates anywhere between $50 billion and $80 billion underfunded. We just passed a new commercial activities tax in the 2019 session. That was promised to go to new programs for schools. That promise has already evaporated in less than a year. And that money is now being used to backfill potential holes in state and local governments, and school districts are being told not to spend or utilize any of the enhanced programs that they saw. So I think that you will see pressure to raise that commercial activities tax, which we had significant concerns around a commercial activities tax in less than great economic times, because it taxes you on your activity rather than your profits. So a business who's actually losing money could face significant tax bills. And we actually saw that at the beginning of this COVID crisis. We pushed very hard for the governor to delay implementation as business revenues dropped. And we had one company as a hardware store in Portland. Their revenue dropped 90% in a day. And yet they still had a significant CAT tax liability because the beginning of the quarter, they had robust sales. They had to make the choice of either paying a $30,000 CAT quarterly payment or keeping on 3 employees. And unfortunately, we were unable to get that extension from the governor. So they made the decision to move forward with terminating the employees. Last one I see is if homeowners use forbearance, will it affect their credit? No, that's part of the bill, is that that it cannot go on their credit reporting. That's similar also, I should say, for tenants who are using the grace period of 6 months. They cannot be subjected to any fines or fees or penalties, and it cannot be reported on their credit that they took advantage of the grace period. All right, I'll go sell some houses. I'll give you a pep talk now.
Thank you, Shaun. This was such incredible information. And thank you for all the hard work that you do to represent us as real estate in our industry. So we appreciate you coming on. It was very good info on not just our industry, but our overall economy and what's going on. A lot of us probably have not necessarily investor clients, but even just people with one rental house, two rental houses who all these things affect. So it's important to stay knowledgeable. So thank you again. And thanks, Beth, for arranging Shaun to be here.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right. And we will post Shaun's presentation in our Facebook group, so you can have access to the links in there as well. So our last topic for today is we want to talk about something that a lot of you are running into like out with your buyers, and that is multiple offer situations and some good strategies to get your offer accepted and win in those scenarios. So Megan, do you want to share with us what you're doing right now when you are representing buyers and you have there's multiple offers, and how you're managing that right now?
Unmute, okay. Yeah, so I'm actually writing an offer right now for a multiple offer situation. The first thing for me when I know there's going to be multiple offers, or I think there's going to be multiple offers, is running really good comparable sales for our buyers to make sure that a list price is accurate, and if it's not accurate, what is a good market value for the property? Because like you can, end of the day, you can write an offer at whatever price you want, your clients are comfortable with, but we need to make sure that it makes sense and that financing will come through. And if it doesn't look like financing will come through, then we need to have a clear understanding for your clients of what that actually means. So I had a good conversation over the weekend. I was broker on call just about like running comparable sales for a multiple offer situation and providing the listing agent with that information to say, hey, we're very confident in this purchase price, to make sure we won't have an issue with appraisal. So I think that's really, really important. And something I don't particularly like escalation clauses. I just find them to be, I find it gets people in trouble, or it gets really, really messy. So a lot of times I'll have a conversation with my clients if we have a good idea of where the multiple offers are going, to just be like, hey, what is your best and final? And let's be very clear about what you're willing to pay, and then work from there. So those are kind of some of the first steps that I take with folks when we know we're going to be facing multiple offers.
Thank you. And then when you are on the other side of it and you have a listing and you receive multiple offers, maybe you can share some about that process other than just looking at price, how, your whole process of comparing goes.
Yeah, I think it's super important to be vetting all of the offers really thoroughly. So you make sure you touch base with all of the buyer's lenders, to have a very clear understanding of their financial strength, how far along they are in their pre-approval process. So I think that's really, really key, and that's something that we do every time. So that's a piece of it. And then like, it's not always about price for your clients. Sometimes it's about dates. Sometimes it's about specific concessions. So knowing that information up front, and having those conversations with your seller clients, even before you go on the market, if you have kind of that gut feeling that you're going to get multiple offers, so that when somebody calls you saying they're going to write, you're not like, oh, let me go talk to my client. I don't know what they want. I don't know when they want to close, because I can't tell you the number of times I call an agent to be like, hey, my client's really interested. What's your seller looking for? And they're like, I don't know, let me talk to them. Like, I think we're doing our clients a disservice if you don't already know that information really clearly. Like, obviously it will change some, but like, doing that vetting up front is super key.
Great suggestions. Thank you.
You're
And anyone else, feel free to chime in. And Chris,
and something else that we've done is also waiving repairs up to a specific amount. So if your clients aren't comfortable with an as-is purchase, but they only want to focus on, the big ticket items, saying seller shall make no single repair under X amount, If that's $500, it really depends what your client's risk tolerance is. I'm pretty risk adverse, just in my life. So for me, that number is typically very low, but then again, we did purchase our current house as is, just because I was really confident in the remodel. So it is so situationally, but I have had good success with saying like seller shall not make any single repair under $1,500, because yes, a water heater is less than $1,500, but a roof isn't, and most crawl space work isn't, and a sewer line repair typically isn't. So the big stuff is normally more expensive than that. And if your clients are okay with that and it's a house that they really want, that can be super helpful. And then like free rent backs and that kind of stuff as well.
That's a great suggestion. The repair especially, probably not a lot of people are taking advantage of that right now.
Yeah, well, and a lot of sellers are worried about like accepting an offer that's a really good offer, but then getting nitpicked to death over like a blown seal on a window. And so it helps protect against some of those conflicts that can come up in repair negotiations. Yeah.
Great. Chris Burley from the Schwab team was going to join us, but she had to last minute run out with a buyer. So Dwight, what do you guys do with buyers?
Well, so I'll share some of the things that we're seeing. We had, I want to reiterate how important it is to have a conversation with the listing agent before you write an offer to try and get a sense for what the needs of the seller are. That is probably the most important thing that you can do. And unfortunately, there are plenty of agents that have no idea what's going on. And so sometimes you have to push those agents a little bit to call their sellers to see if they can get answers to your questions. And so the important ones are things like, is ultimately the price more important than the possession date? Or how do they feel about making repairs to the homes? We noticed a couple of things that that are going to need, that will definitely come up on the home inspection, like blown window seals. We noticed 2 or 3 or 4, or thought we saw some dry rot in the deck, or, just it's what I call floating trial balloons with the listing agent to see how they're going to react to it, to see actually if they've had a conversation with the owners about it. It's really important to try and extract that information from the conversation, because then you can write a cover letter that addresses those things, which reinforces why you're writing the offer that's now adjusting to those needs of the seller. So we had one this weekend. I'll just show some of the things. We've sold a number of listings in the last 10 days or so and presented a number of offers. And so I will tell you that if an agent calls me as a listing agent, I'm the listing agent, I have the home that everyone wants. And if an agent calls me and talks to me in detail about what my owner needs, inevitably that I pick up a sense that that agent is more knowledgeable than an agent that just writes an offer and then emails it over with an email cover. And so if I'm the listing agent and I explain to my owners, we have 2 on the table, and let's say they're all the same, and one is I haven't had a conversation with the agent, they went through the home, wrote an offer and sent it over, and the other is this agent called me and explained to me what was going on with their buyers, where they're coming from, what their situation is, and then asked me a lot of details about the owner. There's no doubt I have a better sense of how that transaction is going to go with the agent that took the time to call me. One of my pet peeves as a listing agent is dealing with agents that don't return phone calls. So you get repairs and you can't get questions answered about, what's on the home inspection that came up, and all kinds of things from, that I want to know as the listing agent. So this week we had one come in, which I thought was actually a good idea, made a difference with my owner. And they offered to make half the earnest money non-refundable after the inspection period. So it was a $5,000. It ultimately became a $5,000 earnest money on the house, and they had offered to make $2,500 non-refundable, which I thought was actually a pretty good idea. So after the inspection period, which of course your client can walk away for pretty much any reason, if you can reach an agreement in the inspections, then the only risk is going to be the appraisal and hopefully not financing. And so then you can, judge whether you think the appraisal is a big risk or not. So I thought that was actually a pretty good idea. I haven't seen that one for a while, but I have seen people that have walked in and said, we'll make our earnest money non-refundable on newer homes because they're not worried about the inspections and they believe the builders have, you know, this 1 year statutory responsibility to take care of the home in case they find something. And so we're seeing that too. I think the hardest part is trying to gauge how much over the list price. So we had one here in the last several days where the listing agent or the selling agent called me and said, hey, look, it was listed at 518, and that agent called and said, hey, I showed the home. There's, you know, they knew there were cards all over the counter because we'd had like 14 showings in 18 hours. It was crazy. And he said, if I write an offer for 530 and get it over to you in the next 20 minutes, will your sellers take it? And we went over some of the other details about it. And I called my seller and I said, hey, if you want to end this process of having all these people come through, are you willing to take an offer for 530? And here are the details. And that owner said yes, because she was tired of being out of her home all day long. And so he had an offer over and put the deal together in front of probably, I would expect we would have had at least 3 more offers the next couple of days. So I thought that was a great strategy too.
That's good. All these little creative tips. So we have a question from Tracy. Is there ever such a thing as putting repair money in escrow rather than lowering the selling price and requiring the money get spent on the repair within a certain period? Or does it go back to the seller? Seems like sometimes people will bring up a repair like the roof and ask for 10K off, but then not replace the roof for like even years later.
There's probably more to that question than what's written in it, but you know, if someone asks for a repair, if I understand the intent of that question, you would put it into, you know, $10,000 into an escrow account, and if they don't do the repair, the seller gets the money back. I think that's what that question is leading to. I've never done that. To me, I feel like you need to just make the decision and end the transaction. I think leaving something lingering in an escrow account is just, you know, a landmine that's somewhere out there that you're probably going to be dealing with down the road. So I think you negotiate it up front, and if you're worried about the $10,000, then don't pay it. That's what I'd say. That's what I'd say to my clients.
Mm-hmm. Chantel, you probably see that written.
Yeah, here and there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb of just get the transaction done, and if you end up lowering the price or giving them money towards close, it's just, and they don't end up doing
It's not your money anymore.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
I think that's a good
kind of
too.
detach from it.
Yeah.
Like, if you wanted to sell it, this was what they needed, and if you were comfortable, like, who cares what they do with it at the end of the day?
Yeah, I could tell you that I've
The
sold
other issue, I was going to say, the other issue that you have to worry about is whether the lender will allow, the buyer's lender will allow you to have money in escrow after close. And most of the time
Which
they
is super
don't.
rare.
Yeah, it's better just to deal with it up front. I could tell you in my career, I've relisted a lot of homes that I originally had listed, and then those buyers called me 5 years later, and they got money like for what was the siding? The siding that was bad for many years.
LP.
LP, and then they never changed the LP siding, right? That was a real common one. And we give money for roofs, and then they never changed the roof. And 4 years later, I'm selling the house again with new buyers, or with you know, now those buyers are my sellers, and they never changed the roof. It's not uncommon. So I think if you're going to dedicate money to something like that as a seller, it becomes the buyer's money, and you don't worry about it. And if the lenders will let you do it, then great. But normally they won't.
Awesome. Great tips, you guys. And then we have also what Peter, and Beth has some good things. I was gonna say what Peter and Alex Park always bring up is using Keller Mortgage to kind of leverage the fact that they do the appraisal first thing day one. So they use that as another tip with multiple offers. Beth, you have some ideas to share?
Yes, I think it's really important to not underestimate how important your relationship with that listing broker is, or if you're the listing agent with the buyer's broker. Even if you don't know the person or you haven't done business with them before, taking 10 minutes and having an honest conversation about, here's who my buyers are, they're well qualified, here's the lender, here's the lender's phone number and email. Please call if you have any questions. And I always end by saying, and this is the transaction that will close, because that's really what we're all after. And on multiple offers in particular, we see them. I was involved in one about 2 months ago. There were 4 backup offers. We were number 3, and we got it because the others kept screwing up and dying off. And I think a lot of times, multiple buyers, when you have multiple offers, the buyers are waiting to see if something better comes along. And when I said to that listing agent, look, my buyers love this property, they're not looking for something else, this is a deal that will close, we got moved to the top of the list pretty darn fast. So having a relationship, an honest relationship, at least in conversation with your co-op, I think is really key.
I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great tip. And just a reminder, if your buyers love a house, to not be afraid to do a backup offer, because we are seeing things go wrong and deals fall out.
We had a sale not long ago, and this gets back to the escalation clauses. As a listing agent, I hate escalation clauses. And what I usually tell my owners is, those are the ones for me historically that have the highest probability of falling through. The people that were in first position because of an escalation clause. And what I tell my owners is, look, you have a choice. You can go with the party that will be put in first position, but chose not to offer a higher price in the very beginning, and will have the highest likelihood of having doubt and regret all the way through the transaction. Or you can go with the party that offered their highest price that they were comfortable with, that they would be comfortable with through the transaction. And sometimes those differences are not that much. And I've had many of my owners completely disregard highest and best offers, escalation clauses, by just going with whoever came in with the cleanest offer and the nice rounded transaction in terms of what they've asked for and closing date and the letter, introduction letter, and that sort of thing, many times.
That's great. Thank you guys all
I
for
agree.
sharing your tips on that, because I know a lot of our agents, especially our newer agents too, are running into this. So if you need help in a multiple offer situation, don't be afraid to reach out to your fellow agents on the Facebook group, the broker hotline, or just call anyone, or come, if you want to come to the office, come knock on someone's door. Just a reminder, we're here. But thank you everyone for your contributions today. And I hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you back here next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.